So it's common for people that have researched this grand collusion over time and space that they focus on the international bankers. Oftentimes, the assessment that they come up with is that they want power, money, control. I agree with all that. I add in my esoteric biopolitics a um, spiritual dimension, which includes an esoteric eschatology of the Venetian oligarchy and all its various strains that pull it together. And I've argued that that's largely Hermetic Kabbalism. And in particular, we can focus on Kabbalism, or I've said, recently, a cabal of Kabbalists. But we see this coming together in one instance in 1773 between the banking house of Rothschilds and the Sabbatine Frankist movement, in addition to Adam Weishaupt. And that is going to continue and produce various other strains within that, one of which is the Chabad Lubavitch strain. And Chabad Lubavitch, according to Wikipedia, is within the Orthodox Jewish tradition, and it's a Hasidic movement. And we can see that it does a lot of outreach. Here's some students: Yale, University of Colorado. See, doing some one-to-one combat, one-to-one relations with certain graduates over there at Harvard. You even see it, not surprisingly, with certain actors in Hollywood. But who are the Lubavitchers, and what is their influence, and what is their agenda? And I want to explore that because I don't see it worked out too much out there in Trutherland on the internet. And a lot of times when this is introduced, and I know Henry Mako has done a treatment of this for 10 years now, it oftentimes begins with a more recent iteration of a Messiah that follows both Sabbatai Zevi and Jacob Frank. And this more recent iteration produces the same Kabbalistic thought that there's a class of people that have to bring the many parts of God into union or oneness. And so highly Kabbalistic, it stands in opposition to the biblical narrative, again, of God standing outside of creation and being all good, this other notion, the dualistic, and you're probably aware of this. And Wolfgang Eggert, a German historian, well-trained, has isolated them as the head of the snake. And he's been doing research on this for over 15 years. And, when we look at a quote here from Schneerson, he said this really embodies the agenda of this cult. And he believes that to bring their combination of Talmudic and Old Testament prophecy together, they need to bring the world into destruction. Somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of the world need to be decimated. And so that aligns in a certain way with things like a depopulation agenda. But it's this idea, the fulfillment of this version of prophecy. And you can see that even after he died, this messianic figure was celebrated with a congressional gold medal for global morals. And this, on again, these racist statements he's made on and on and on. And there's similar veins of rabbis that have made these extremely racist statements. Perhaps the most dangerous thing you can say on the internet is a revelation of these statements. But, one of the interesting observations that he's a secular historian, Eggert, said is that one of the functions of the United States is to introduce and extend Noahide laws throughout the world. And he said this has always been a function of Freemasonry. They see themselves as Noachides. And so that's going to be an interesting part of the New World Order that I've argued before will be theistic. It's going to bring people under the old Testament Noahide laws as the Pharisees conceived them. Eggert believes right now that both Germany and Israel are specific targets of this group. And if it's the head of the snake, this would be sort of the destiny of these two places, which would be to destroy them. Germany, sort of a particular reading of the Old Testament, this Gog and Magog, enemies of this seed of the woman or the serpent, depending on your perspective. And of course, Israel would have to be targeted. Of course, all of the Old Testament prophecies about the destruction of Jerusalem. But if you're in opposition to that and don't see those as fulfilled prophecies and stand in darkness, you need to create those because it was God's will that it happened. Again, I'm saying this because these are things I can't say at the university. If I could, I would, but this is why I'm here with a handful of subscribers giving you my take. So they're going to manufacture this. They're going to degrade human beings, dumb human beings down to the point that they can't see who their oppressor is. They're going to give them some kind of lifestyle where they love their slavery, and at the end, they will decimate the bulk of human beings. Of course, this isn't a terribly interesting or remarkable topic because there's so many other things going on in television and on the internet. But Eggert says in particular, if you are in Jerusalem, there's a lot of beware, beware. And so as we see events culminating around that area of the world, this is something for us to consider. Look at the relative weight of the influence of this group upon the banking class and whether or not it matches with conditions going on in the world. So before I continue, I'm going to give you this broad deep state analysis of this force behind the current leaders of the world. And this is deep history and deep politics. This is an idea that within the Venetian oligarchy, there's always been this messianic strain to bring about the prophesied Messiah. And in order to do that, history and politics itself have to be played like stagecraft and theater. So in order to bring Old Testament prophecy to life, because after all, if God is sort of has no qualities, the messianic class becomes God. And after they've achieved their new order, they will be worshipped as gods and replace God. So in order to do this, they captured in the ancient world the banking system. They captured Freemasonry through the Rothschilds and the Westervelts, as we said, with the Unholy Alliance. They colluded with the British monarchy all the way from William III. And they put the British royals at the head of Freemasonry and, of course, intermarried with them. They made the modern banking system. They created Zionism. They created the world wars, of course, in order to have a homeland and to create the United Nations. They created the European Union. And according to one view, if we're going to argue that this group is actually on top of the bankers, we see that the bankers are actually taking their orders from this esoteric group. And that's what we have to kind of sort through, is this idea that the bankers are actually subordinated to this messianic class of people. And the idea here, again, is this Carol Quigley idea that real power does not show its face, and that what's hidden behind us, where I'm going to go with this, is the suggestion that there's actually the Davidic seed line that is in control of events today. And that's quite something to put out there. But I'm going to try to invite people when they do their own research to think about the relative weight of these different dependent variables upon the outcome that they're looking at. And finally, they're responsible for fomenting events in the world today to drive us toward World War III. And before I continue, if this seems heavy, I'm not going to. What we believe matters. This is part of, what we've been inculcated with, that we have no power and control. It's like, what theory should I embrace? What political movement? Get it straight up here. This is what matters. Okay. And so you might have to look into some of the darkness, but that's the most important thing. What you believe will change your life here, and I believe beyond.